It's always entertaining to find films where people are practically begging for an Oscar during a performance, instead of having a sincere input for movies. Someone who just tries to do the most acting instead of actually acting. Bradley Cooper during his film Maestro, where instead of doing something like just memorizing what Bernstein did in the video footage, he just trained himself to do it organically. Or the very harsh thing of telling Bernstein's family members that his soul has literally entered his body. At least that one kind of makes sense for trying to win an Oscar. Do a biopic of someone in sports, movies, or music, and the chances are high. Will Smith did his attempt too for the film Collateral Beauty. However, it was received so poorly that it actually has a reputation of being so bad it's good. It also shows poor planning on the filmmakers' part. It wasn't a biopic, and ironically, Will Smith being in one is what won his dream Oscar. Instead, this film is a Hallmark style inspirational film set during Christmas. And yes, he does the usual most acting stuff. He wants to tear your heartstrings apart and make you cry on top of being inspired. We do get a hilarious film, but it is a film that talks about philosophy and psychology in a way that is so disastrous that it's dangerous and borders on being incredibly bold filmmaking. It shows why the chicken soup for the soul crowd can actually get in the way of someone's healing if they require more of a, let's say, intervention. There are some segments in psychology that are just recent revelations, so this film can be kind of outdated, but to make it frustrating, they show the solutions right there. And for some reason, they don't say that this is the truly healthy route. The philosophical aspect is that it purely focuses on idealism. However, it ignores the part where intervention is required, even if it's one initiated by the lead. This might be a hot take, but I believe this film proves the flaws of idealism, as using that sort of logic for this film makes it completely fall apart, and shows how looking at it through a more materialist lens makes the film make a lot more sense. This episode will be quote unquote deeper than my usual ones, but I think with how this film is, it'll be quite fun to talk about. First, let's talk about the film on its surface level. That is simply because this plot is literally the most baffling thing I've seen out of a bigger budget, box office success, and inspirational film. It's actually very immoral and, dare I say, full on evil. It opens with Will Smith's character Howard. He usually uses the sort of traps that CEOs use, like saying, no, we are not a company, we are like a lifestyle, and uses idealism to show how anyone can accomplish what he has set out to do. He then lists his three abstract concepts that people should always use: love, time, and death. It then cuts to him around 2 years later, and right at the opening credits, it's pure cringe. He's very depressed, and they have to show his life falling apart. They do this by him doing those large domino sort of pathways, and when it collapses, they play the song Way Down We Go by Kaleo. Yeah, subtle, I know. He then walks out of the office by going underneath the stairs with the camera being from the bottom. They usually use this sort of angle to make the actor more dominant, just towering over everything, but instead with this shot, the staircase is the one that ends up becoming the dominant figure. It's actually quite clever, at least compared to that song choice from before. This is all because he's been grieving his daughter's death from 2 years ago, who died from a rare form of cancer. The executives and co owners then show the stakes, stating that they are about to have to shut down their company because Howard is too depressed. They are quickly losing clients and are going broke. There is an offer to sell the company, but the co owner Whit, played by Edward Norton, lost his 50-50 share distribution between him and Howard. Why? Because he slept with one of his employees and had to sell 10% of the shares to cover the divorce when it came out to the public. Imagine if a co owner did that now. So, they need a plan. First, they hire a private investigator to track him down, and they find out that he's been spending his spare time writing letters and mailing them to those three abstract concepts. Basically, he uses his idealism of those three abstract concepts to inspire others, and he thinks that's what's going to help him get out of that predicament. The private investigator steals the letters, and then the baffling step comes in. Wit comes across three actors looking to do a play, but they desperately need money to fund that play. And I'm being serious, this is what the plan is. Which shows the other executives one of the firm's commercials. It was for a medication that deals with anger issues, and they do this by showing an angry teacher and a physical manifestation of that emotion coming into the classroom to call him out. So, what if they do that with him? They plan to literally gaslight him by hiring those three actors as concepts, and for them to do that Three Stooges sort of trope to try to get him to change his ways. To make matters worse, they want him to get pissed off at him, and for the private investigator to record everything. During this, they'll simply edit the actors out of the scenes, making him look like he's talking to himself. With that, they'll say, yeah, he's just too insane to be part of this company, and he'll be forced to give up his shares and his job. Yes, it's literally the meanest plan ever. They could have easily gotten like some sort of medical order to say he didn't work well for 2 years, or the slightly more evil route of suing him while using this evidence, but now let's drive him to the point of literal insanity. They then show a slightly healthier aspect regarding this. Firstly, Howard was literally trying to go to therapy himself. It was a very slow process, but he goes into group therapy with a counselor named Madeline. He even does a one on one session with her eventually. To make matters even weirder, each of the three executives have to train the three actors of what to do, and of course, each one has their own problems related to which concept they are talking about. One is dying of cancer, one missed her chance at having a family and wants to fix that, and the guy who had sex with his employees trying to fix things with his estranged daughter. So, instead of Howard getting better by himself, he just gets gaslit and basically is unemployed. The three executives that did it get their own problems solved through light therapy and have their happy arcs. Basically, be a nihilistic asshole doing everything you can, and good things will happen to you. To add to the cringe at the end, Madeline was actually his ex wife, and they left each other because of their grief. And for some reason agreed, yes, let's just pretend to be strangers to make Howard even better. This was one of the ultimate twists at the end. On top of that, there is the ambiguity of whether or not the actors were indeed actors or the actual concepts taking a physical form. Yes, I will be a bit annoying here, and I'll have to talk about materialist thought. Fortunately, I don't have to go deep into it at all, even for a more complex philosopher who actually just completely breaks my brain if I'm being honest. Let's compare an idealist with a materialist. An idealist would have an idea saying, I want to build a shelter. And from there, they'll think of the resources like, oh, maybe I'll need wood. Maybe I'll need straw for the roof, and so on and so forth. A materialist would look at stuff like the wood and the straw and says, I see these resources here. Can I maybe build something with these things like shelter? I'm not saying one is better than the other, it's just I believe in the materialist one. However, the thing is, this film tries to aim for idealism, and I'll prove how it does such a poor job of it. This is what leads to my proof. A philosopher named Gilles Deleuze. The only concepts we'll have to go through is effects. Basically, he believed that a person changes when they are affected. Through this, they need a more physical change in their environments. With those changes, it will change how the person reacts to stuff in the outside, and it's simply beyond stuff like emotion. There is proof of this in regards to mental health, actually. There are a lot more studies coming out recently that shows depression is caused not by a chemical imbalance, but rather through environmental events. Even something like seasonal depression is a good example of this with, well, the seasons. Something like bipolar and schizophrenia happens through stuff like genetics, childhood trauma, or drug use. Even if someone is in a state of psychosis, stuff has to physically happen in the outside world. You become paranoid because one person was acting weird, or some very minor event can cause a voice to say something specific to you. I'm not one of those big anti pharma sort of people, but I am a believer that they simply want long term commitment to stuff rather than full on cures, because that's what gives them more income. And stuff like these studies on depression is more of a revelation, as therapists and doctors will now have newfound knowledge on how to overcome it. This is actually a good thing because it shows that it was outside events for things such as depression. And because of that separation, it's something that you can have at least the motivation to know that you can overcome it. It's not something like, oh, your brain is simply broken. We will now look at this film through both lenses. For the opening speech, let's be real. He simply utilizes idealistic concepts to inspire the high pressure employees to work harder, thinking that they can become rich just like their CEO. However, this is where the mess is. Howard and Witt found something what is marketable, what is missing in their field in New York City, what has lower competition, and what resources they can acquire to do such a thing. They were most likely privileged as well, being able to acquire funding for this. The main evidence are the letters themselves. Love, time, and death were the inspirational points he gave to his staff. But when he spent years writing to these concepts, nothing happened. He was making no progress at all when he treated them as ideas. I would honestly go all out and say that he used those points to ignore the material reality of the loss of his child. What gave him progress? The two things at the opposite ends of the spectrum: his slow progress towards group therapy, and when those three ideas had to become physical beings. They had to take place in his environment and personally affect him to change him. Basically, they had to become materialist for them to actually change him. We then have to turn to the more workplace angle to see how they connect with each other. I believe that commercial showing that medication for anger said enough. Companies these days care a lot about mental health, but only to an extent. All they say is, take this pill and go back to work. It's all good after that. This is another reason why Big Pharma does that strategy. It helps to keep that machine going. The three executives each have their need for therapy. They have something that can at least be, in comparison, easier to overcome. It is something that is more of a quote unquote quick fix that will allow them to go back into the workforce easily, or in their cases, still allow them to work regardless. Well, except for the guy with terminal cancer, I guess, but they are going to exploit him until the very end. Howard is the other case. He is borderline catatonic in his state. He is someone who honestly could even be considered disabled at this point. What does the workforce want with him in that case? They simply want to drive him out, sell his shares, and make him unemployed. When they edit the actors out and confront him with it, this is the interesting part with the twists. Firstly, they never outright say they hired actors. The closest is Kate Winslet saying, "We've done a lot more than that," when Howard said, "You followed and recorded me." That's not explicitly saying that they hired actors. He still was gaslit and still thinks he was just rambling to abstract concepts in public. He technically can't become insane from gaslighting, but he will be at the point where he will never be able to trust himself again and will think that there are physical manifestations of concepts forever following him. He then needs to go to his material environment. He needs his anchor after hitting rock bottom. He goes to the only person he can truly trust, Madeline. This is when he says his daughter's name and how she died, and it seems like progress is finally happening. I assume this was the whole inspirational part, and that is truly scary to me. They want people to hit rock bottom so they can start their journey to become better. They care about what the end point is. The problem with how this film did it is that they want you to ignore what got him there in the first place. The grief was there, and he had his own way of doing it. When doing a one on one with Madeline, she was telling a story of who she met in the hospital. It was uncomfortable for Howard, especially by showing shots going closer and closer to him, and he panicked and had to leave. Still, that's great progress. Therapy is about slowly confronting someone and making them uncomfortable, but done in a way that they'll keep coming back with making progress. With this, they did it in a way that can pretty much lead to permanent damage. The final scene was at a bridge with the three actors looking at Howard and Madeline. He sees them, but she doesn't. So it asks you, are they actors or are they the concepts? The problem is that the twist literally doesn't matter. We see it through his point of view. He's been gaslit so badly by his coworkers, he actually doesn't know the truth. And leaving that sort of ambiguity at the ending shows that he will never know the objective reality. I can kind of see the argument against this being the scene where you see Madeline talking to the old woman and it's actually the same person. However, I still think my theory works because it is shown through Howard's point of view once again. So basically, it transfers from his office with the dominoes to the hospital. It shows who Madeline met with, but because it started from the office, you could say that it is through his point of view. It shows who he thinks Madeline met with, not who she actually met with. Oddly enough, this felt a lot like Shutter Island, and it makes you wonder how this form of gaslighting and psychological torture works. In Shutter Island, they had good intentions, and if we ignore what he does at the end, as valid as it is, it ended up with him able to see reality. With Collateral Beauty, they do this in a negative way, and he is going to be damaged in the long term, either gaslit forever from what they've done to him, or the eventual realization and a level of betrayal that may even lead to more trauma. But the one with the good intentions is a horror thriller, while this evil one is the inspirational film. It truly shows the power of surface level veneers for the average moviegoer. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.